and the Indian cultural context to be able to produce those outputs. But if there are holdouts because creators groups sees this as an opportunity to make revenue, and the tech is not able to advance, then India will lose out in that race, right? Having said that, so what the committee said is that we'll do a blanket license, no opt-outs, but the government will set a rate which all AI companies have to pay royalty on. That will then become the money that will flow to creators. But the way they have done it, they said that the government committee will decide a certain percentage of revenue, gross global revenue of models that have been commercialized, that will accrue to these creators, that will be collected. Now, there are multiple problems with this construct, right? Firstly, models are being developed globally, and some models may have trained only a small amount of Indian content, but we are tying their global revenue to make a payment. And then there is also, in some cases, if you see, models may not be deployed independently. Like you see, Gemini, for instance, has been integrated in search. So how do you decide how much of search revenue should be attributable to Gemini? And then on that basis, how do you decide what percentage should come to Indian creators, right? So I feel that
so number of operational challenges that you've pointed out on the side of the companies as well. From the side of the creators, does this loss of agency, the inability to negotiate, a creator not having agency on their own creation, not being able to negotiate, will that also come in the way of perhaps realizing what could be a good, a sustainable remuneration for the creators, for the creator economy at large?
It will, because right now, see, ultimately all content, copyrighted material cannot be placed on equal value, right? In fact, currently, if you see some of the AI companies negotiating deals with media houses or publishers, etc., globally, and they're valuing it at different levels depending on what is the value that content brings to their model. For instance, right now there are deals happening between TV producers, media publications, etc., and each is valued differently. So I feel that creators who are currently being able to demand more in the market may feel shortchanged, and may feel that their art is not being valued the way, or their work is not being valued the way it can be valued in a free market. Whereas the creators, there are many creators right now who are not even coming to the negotiating table because they're not aggregated, or they don't have a voice. So I think the government has tried to find a compromise solution where one side loses to some extent, but the other gains. But I feel that the solution that they come up with is not going to succeed either.
So the government trying to walk the middle path here, at least that is what the DPIIT officials were telling us. But going forward, of course, many questions being asked about how sustainable this approach will be going forward. Open to public comments. The government saying that if this were to go forward, they could possibly consider an amendment to the Copyright Act. But that's unfortunately all the time that we have. Rohit, thank you so much for joining us, being a part of this conversation. But moving ahead now, the second story on our radar today, the government has told the parliament that India has set its own air quality standards, and WHO guidelines are only advisories meant to help nations frame metrics. In a written reply in the Rajya Sabha, the Minister of State for Environment, Kirti Vardhan Singh, today said that global air quality rankings cited by various organizations are not conducted by any official authority. He added that the World Health Organization's air quality norms serve only as advisory values and are not binding standards. A report by Switzerland-based air quality monitoring company IQ Air earlier this year had highlighted that 13 of the world's top 20 most polluted cities are in India. Lok Sabha Leader of Opposition and Congress MP Rahul Gandhi has called for an urgent and cross-party debate on the worsening of air pollution crisis. The centre has agreed to conduct this discussion. To take this ahead, we're now joined by Amit Bhatt, the India Managing Director for International Council for Clean Transportation. Mr. Bhatt, thank you so much for joining us. Again, first question. These are some very credible indices that we're talking about here. The IQ Air World Air Quality Rankings, the WHO Global Air Quality Database, the Environmental Performance Index, Global Burden of Disease. These are very highly reputed, and they are very widely considered indices across the board when it comes to policy making. India seems to, however, not too keen on accepting the findings. And that's one consistent finding, that India is, in fact, some of the cities here are some of the most polluted. Reasons why you think the government here is not too keen on accepting the findings of some of these very credible reports that have been put out in the public domain?
Absolutely, Ashmit. I think if you look at even the global air quality standards that countries have, and these vary across geography. So, for example, if you look at so what WHO says is in terms of the guidelines on particulate matter 2.5 exposure is about 5 on an annual standard level, and about 2 on 24 hours basis it is about 15. And if you take that number and compare globally, it varies across geographies. And so the reason is that so if you have to fight air pollution, it has to be a long-term fight, a sustainable fight, and it requires a lot of action. And sometimes it will take time. Sometimes the decisions may not be very kind of forthcoming, but I think the action has to be all around the year. But again, as I said, the variations are there across the geographies. But again, if you look at closely the data, the standards are very stringent, especially in the developed countries as compared to developing countries.
Just one follow-up question to that, Mr. Bhatt, that when we look at these findings, they're not terribly inconsistent with what we experience on a daily basis. Even when we have our AQI monitors at home, some of the AQI sensors that are publicly available, it is not inconsistent with that. Is this something that the government now needs to reconcile with, that the government and that the findings of these reports may be extremely damaging for India's reputation, but it is consistent with situation that we have actually on the ground?
Absolutely. And that's what I was trying to allude to, that if you look at findings, even from the low-cost sensor data that has come from many various cities, the findings are pretty consistent that air quality is pretty bad in Indian cities. While it is severe across the Indo-Gangetic plain, yet if you look at a national level average, I think almost cities that have air quality data, almost 70-80% cities require almost 50 to 70% reduction in their particulate matter exposure, even to meet the Government of India guidelines. And if you look at the WHO guidelines, then all the cities actually fail to meet the WHO guidelines. So I think it is very consistent, but I think we have to understand that air pollution fight is a pretty systemic fight where you have to look at a regional approach, an airshed approach. Only then the action will happen. Sure. It is not limited to action in cities or just one or two geographies.
One common finding that comes to us through medical professionals is that the air quality levels that we currently have, say, for example, in the national capital, will have very severe, long-lasting implications for one's health. However, the rationale that seems to be coming from the government is that there is no conclusive data to establish direct correlation between death or disease and exclusively pollution. Again, is it a case where we're not using the right data points to inform policy decisions? Is there a better data management system that we need, at least when it comes to sensitive issues such as air quality management?
No, absolutely. And again, so if there is no conclusive air quality data which links public health to air quality, I think government can absolutely fund a study which can throw this data. So, and we have pretty well-established organizations, government institutes which can do this. So that's absolutely doable. But again, if you look at anecdotally, and if you look at things like asthma, pulmonary diseases, even in the kids who are, taking leaves from school, especially certain time of the year, you will find a very stark correlation between deteriorating air quality and public health. So we have very strong empirical data, even a lot of anecdotal data, but there is always a possibility to fund a scientific research and get the data on board and take some action on it.
Right, Mr. Bhatt, thank you so much for joining us. Clearly, this is an issue that doesn't need a red flag, but a number of indicators pointing in that direction that we're clearly not doing enough. There is a comprehensive solution required going forward to this air quality crisis. Mr. Bhatt, thank you once again for joining us on the show. But with that, we're slipping into a very short break. But coming up, a US ambassador to India says that the telephonic conversation between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump was a great call between two friends. A special conversation with Pramit Pal Chaudhuri of Eurasia Group when we return on the other side.
"26 years of CNBC TV 18. "26 years of CNBC TV 18.
Welcome back. You're watching News Center with me, Ashmit Kumar. Now, trade negotiations between India and United States continue to gather steam. Sergio Gore, the U.S. ambassador to India, has said that the telephonic conversation between Prime Minister Modi and President Trump was a great call between two friends. The Indian government said that both leaders reviewed progress in the strategic partnership and agreed to work closely to address shared challenges and advance common interests. The phone call between Modi and Trump was their first since Diwali. Remember, both countries want to seal a framework agreement by the end of this year. And to help us understand what this road ahead now looks like, how far away this trade deal is, I'm now joined by Pramit Pal Chaudhuri, practice head of the South Asia division at Eurasia Group. Mr. Chaudhuri, thank you so much for joining us. Would just like to quickly draw your attention to a couple of triggers here. Number one, the US negotiators are here. Number two, there are reports of India committing to some form of defense purchases from American suppliers. Number three, we now have this latest call take place between the leaders of the two countries. And the ambassador here telling us that things are as the best they've ever been between the two countries. The question I want to ask you is this the closest that India-US have been to a trade deal in the last 12 months?
No, not really. I mean, let's put it this way. It's hard to tell because we don't have the actual negotiation details, but we know that roughly in a period running between June and September, India and the US negotiators actually came to at least a first tranche trade agreement. But in each case, President Trump rejected it on the grounds that he felt India had not made sufficient concessions, largely in the realm of agriculture and in some cases goods. This is now the fifth such occasion where the negotiators have more or less concluded an agreement and they're now waiting for President Trump to give the political green signal. So the question really is the signaling from Trump positive? Because he alone really holds the key to this. Prime Minister Modi, the Indian system has been more than happy to agree to the previous agreements. There, I think, yes, the signposts are positive. One is that, of course, that they're actually talking, and this conversation, it seems, didn't really have any purpose. In other words, the previous calls have been over Modi's birthday or congratulating Trump on diplomatic efforts. This seems to be being quite impromptu, which is a good sign. Trump runs a very personalized foreign policy, and the fact that there was a gap between June and all the way till September was in fact a very bad sign in the relationship. And we have reports that Modi refused to talk to Trump at least 3 times during that period, which is somewhat unprecedented in diplomacy. Now that they are talking, and they are talking, it seems, on a reasonably random basis. Second, as you mentioned, the USTR team is here, and though they are not here for any genuine line-by-line conversations, what we do know is that they are very, very close to a first tranche agreement. I don't think we will have time to complete it this year, but I think you saw Anant Nageshwar, the chief economic advisor of the Indian government, say by the end of this fiscal year, he would expect to do.
Right. Let me follow that up with the Indian perspective. Is there now a sense of urgency creeping in? A lot of exporters are shipping goods despite the tariff losses in the hope that there will be a trade agreement. Does this put India in a back foot that we're now eager to close a deal as soon as possible, that the clock is ticking for India to wrap this up to ensure that there is no severe hit coming in for Indian exporters, the textile industries, the industries that are impacted?
I actually think to some degree what's happened now is that both the Indians and the Indians, I think the American view was that they had leverage on India, both in terms of the 25% punitive tariff on Russian oil, as well as the original 25% tariff. But what's actually happened is the Indian economy has thrived despite the tariffs. So of course, would do better if the tariffs weren't there. But when you're recording 8% plus growth in a quarter, very clearly the tariffs are not having the kind of impact that Trump has. Trump is very transactional. He's also a very aggressive negotiator. As you can see, he's done with almost every other country in the world. It's not specific to us. And I think we're starting to see the American side conclude that actually these pressure points are not working with India. So therefore, you're moving to a negotiating process, which is much more one of trying to get a deal rather than trying to, should we say, force the other into a sort of coercive
Sure.
status. So I think, therefore, we're
And
actually in
you
a better shape to where than we were before.
We're running out of time. I'll just come to you for one final question that for long, India has maintained that there are red lines that it has as far as agri products are concerned. To get that final nod of approval from Donald Trump, will it require India to perhaps make certain compromises when it comes to those red lines on agri products?
Yes, I think that for Trump, that's really the only thing that really matters to him. It's his MAGA farmers in Iowa, Kansas, Nebraska, who are the core of his political constituency. If he does not give them anything, for him, this trade deal is useless. So I think what the compromise area is that since India does not allow genetically modified food crops, at least at present, the actual grain we will not necessarily buy, but products produced by those grains we have allowed into this country before. We are one of the largest importers of soybean oil in the world. We import livestock feed. We import ethanol, of certain made from corn. We
Right.
don't necessarily need all of it right now, but that gives you that space to make a concession on agriculture that would fit in with our requirements.
Right, Mr. Chaudhary, an interesting perspective that despite the red lines, there is wiggle room available to India that it can exploit going forward as a part of this trade negotiations. But I'd like to thank you, Mr. Chaudhary, for joining us, being a part of this conversation. Mr. Chaudhary, they're saying that it's unlikely that we do it by the end of this year, but optimistic that perhaps by the end of this fiscal FY26, that's March 2026, there could be light at the end of the tunnel. But with that, it's a wrap on this edition of News Center. More news and updates will continue right here on CNBC TV 18.
"26 years of CNBC TV 18.
Oh my God.